Composting is important to me because I want to reduce the amount of waste that I send to a landfill or an incinerator, therefore contributing my little grain of sand, so to speak, to help preserve Mother Earth. I will begin with stating the benefits of composting, followed by instructions on how you can make your own compost bin to be able to compost indoors with the use of vermiculture, in other words, composting with worms, and how you can maintain your bin. Lastly, I will give you some links to helpful websites that can provide some additional information on vermiculture and composting in general. Composting has benefits for both gardening and the environment. For gardening, composting reduces or totally eliminates the need to use chemical fertilizers. It also adds nutrients and beneficial microbes to the soil. It promotes higher yield of crops. It helps to keep the soil's moisture and suppresses plant diseases and pests. There are tons of benefits of composting for gardening, but I would like to mention just a little more about the benefits of composting for the environment. Compost has the ability to regenerate poor soil, and as aforementioned, it promotes the production of beneficial soil organisms that are able to break down organic material and as a result creates humus, which is rich in nutrients. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, compost can treat semi-volatile and volatile organic compounds. These include compounds like heating fuels, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are atmospheric pollutants and human carcinogens, and explosives. Compost can also bind to heavy metals to impede the migration of these metals to a near water source, as well as to prevent plants from absorbing them. It also has the ability to degrade or eliminate wood preservatives, pesticides, as well as chlorinated and non-chlorinated hydrocarbons from the soil. And finally, compost can also help to prevent pollution according to the EPA website. Now, I would like to show you how you can compost indoors. Your compost bin does not take a lot of space, so even if you live in a small apartment, you can still compost. There are many ways to build a compost bin, but I will show you the way that I found easiest and most economical for me. To build your own compost bin, you only need a few things: 2 storage bins or totes, a drill with a small drill bit, and a sturdy object. 1 tote will be used to place the organic waste and the organisms that will eventually decompose the waste. This bin will be placed inside the second bin. The bins will look like this. The second bin is used to collect compost tea, which is all the liquid that is produced in the process of decomposition. The drill bit will be used to make holes on the upper edge of the first bin to provide some oxygen for the worms and to make holes at the bottom of the first bin. The holes on the bottom of the first bin provides passage to the second bin for the compost tea to drain. The third thing is a sturdy object, and I will explain later what it is used for and what you can use as your object. Take your first bin and drill quite a bit of holes at the bottom of the bin, enough to let the compost bin drain into the second bin. Then drill holes a few centimeters apart along the side towards the upper end of the tote. Like I mentioned before, these holes will provide the oxygen necessary for the decomposition and for the living organisms inside your tote. After you have drilled the holes on one of the bins, take the other bin and place a sturdy object inside it. It is probably best to place it at the center of the bin. This sturdy object can be a sturdy plastic container or a brick. The purpose for this object is to prop up the first bin to leave enough room in the second bin for the compost tea to collect. After you have placed the object inside the second bin, you can now place the first bin on top of the object. Once you have your bins ready, you can start to make the bedding. I make my bedding with paper shreds from newspapers, magazines, cardboard, mail envelopes, or any other paper products. Once you have all of the paper shredded inside the first bin, or the bin that goes on top, however you want to look at it, you can take a spray bottle with the water to moisten the paper shreds. You want enough water to moisten the paper, but not so much that you'll have excess water draining into your bottom bin. After the bedding is ready, you can place the red wigglers inside the bin. Experts recommend a 1-to-1 ratio for each pound of red wigglers, 1 pound of waste. Don't just leave the worms on top of the paper shred, but rather embed them in the paper shreds. After the worms are inside the bin, you can place the organic waste inside as well. Now, what constitutes as organic waste? Organic waste is any green waste like fruit residue such as banana peels or apple cores and leftover vegetables. I would like to mention here that if you are putting vegetables inside your compost bin, make sure that they are not greasy. Do not put the vegetables that are left over from your stir fry because the excess grease will make your compost smell. You can also place used napkins or paper towels inside your bin. Or, once you have made a pot of coffee or tea, you can place the coffee filter with the coffee or your tea bags inside the compost bin. You can also place eggshells inside your bin. With the eggshells, make sure that you wash them thoroughly because, again, you do not want your compost to smell. Bread that is left over or that is not edible can be placed inside the bin as well. Make sure to place your bin in a place where it is not too hot and not too cold, somewhere between 40 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and somewhere dark. The worms are very particular about their environment, and if they are not comfortable or hungry, they will begin crawling to the top of the bin towards the lid. There are some that will go to the top, but I wouldn't be alarmed if there are a few towards the top. I have not had any problems with worms escaping the bin and crawling about my apartment. Now, what cannot go inside your compost bin? Meat or meat products, bones, dairy or dairy products, greasy foods, and a limited amount of acidic materials such as orange, lime, or lemon peels, onions, etc. Everything on this list besides the last two items cannot go into your bin due to odor problems. If you do not want your compost bin to smell, and that smell to spread all over your house and apartment, these items cannot go into your bin. For the acidic materials, it won't produce any foul odors, but the red wigglers do not like acidic organic waste and will only eat a limited amount. And finally, do not place any aluminum foil, plastic, or glass inside your bin because the worms cannot and won't eat these materials. There is none to very limited amount of work that needs to be done once the bin is built. Make sure that your worms have enough food to eat. Remember, for 1 pound of food, 1 pound of organic waste. After I feed them 1 pound of food, it usually takes them a couple of weeks to eat the waste. You do not want to overload your worms with waste because the waste will begin to rot before the worms can eat it, and this will cause the contents of the bin to smell. Also, store your compost tea. Since I only garden during the summertime, I usually give my compost tea to family members in soda bottles or water bottles for them to use. Compost tea is said to be better than fertilizer for plants to grow. You can dilute your compost tea with water using a 1-to-1 ratio and water your plants with this tea. Compost tea takes a while to produce, so I usually go a few months before I have to put it in the bottles. Third, make sure that you are moving the dark soil that is produced from composting to one side of your bin. You do not have to move your worms since they will travel to where the food is, but simply move the soil to one side and begin placing the new organic waste on the other half of the bin. Make sure to make more bedding once it is all gone, since the worms will eat their bedding as well. And lastly, open the bin once in a while to make sure that your worms are happy with their environment. As I mentioned before, if there are some that are at the top of the bin, do not be alarmed. Simply just bury them inside the bedding and waste. If there are a lot of worms that are trying to escape the bin, then there is a problem. Usually when the worms are trying to escape the bin, it can mean a few things. Their environment could be too acidic. As I mentioned before, limit the amount of acidic food scraps that you place inside the bin. If the environment is too cold or too hot, remember that the appropriate temperature for red wigglers is anywhere between 40 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. If the bin is placed in a location where there is a lot of traffic or a lot of noise, the worms will be less happy. If the environment is too moist, the worms will migrate to drier areas. Some problems for you could be strong odors being emitted from the compost bin. However, if you stay away from putting any of the items that I mentioned before, and do not overload the worms with food, you shouldn't have a problem with this. The second problem is fruit flies. You can avoid this problem by not overloading the worms with food and burying your organic waste. Also, if you place a plastic sheet or an old piece of carpet on top of the compost, your problem should resolve. If all else fails, you can place some friendly spiders near the bin, but I'm not too fond of spiders, so I would try the plastic sheet first. Here are some helpful websites that I used to build my compost bin and to learn more about vermiculture, or composting with worms.